what she refers to as the secret of life, which she probably imagined would be some kind of vitalism, as one theory of the day called the supposed life force, or galvanism, which is based on the observation that an electric shock can cause a dead frog's legs to twitch. Walton explains that he's withholding the secret from us because we might go on to misapply it, as Frankenstein did. The monster is unnamed, often referred to as the creature, for Frankenstein has created it from various body parts, unidentifiable, robbed from recently dug graves and assembled on a larger than human scale in order to make the work easier, because it's less microscopic and tedious. The result is a disproportionately large, elongated human. Mary Shelley doesn't describe any physical details, no stitches, no bolt, but this creature's skin and eyes are said to be yellow and its lips black. Frankenstein's initial horrified reaction to the creature is not so much based on its appearance, which he says has been ugly, but really not really horrific until it moves, at which point he says the beauty of the dream vanished. So feeling not fear, but horror and disgust, in his words, Frankenstein rushes from the laboratory to his room, falls into a troubled sleep, later awakens to find the creature staring down at him with, quote, one hand stretched out seemingly to detain me. I read that as a gesture of friendship that Victor misinterprets. He flees again, this time to the courtyard. And Victor doesn't see the creature again for some time after that, and he tries to forget that it might still be alive somewhere as he closes up his isolated workshop of filthy creation, as he calls it, and manages to re-enter society, even becomes engaged to his patiently waiting fiancée, Elizabeth. The creature intervenes and forces Frankenstein to listen to its tale of how he was kind and gentle when first created. Having educated himself and experienced the world, the creature becomes disillusioned as society has mistreated him. All he wanted was companionship, he tells Victor. But instead of finding friends, the creatures encountered judgmental, hostile, prejudiced people who assume, based on his appearance, that he must be a danger to them. A blind man initially befriends the creature, but his son intervenes and drives it from their house. The creature saves the girl from drowning, only to be shot and wounded by her father. Thus angered, the creature becomes dangerous. And unlike the Hollywood monster, however, Victor's creature is agile as well as preternaturally strong. He's able to quickly scale cliffs, jump over crevasses in the Swiss Alps. He's also intelligent, having taught himself language and culture by eavesdropping on a foreign student learning English, and then reading some books he's found, one of which is Milton's Paradise Lost, with this story of another creature named Adam, whose God did not abandon him in spite of his misadventures in the Garden of Eden.
Jim. In order, I don't want you to give away the end. That's the. I'm kidding.
We should.
But I think we should have you finish up real quickly so we can get on. If you want to take just 30 seconds to just wrap up your thoughts, so we can go on to the next.
Okay. Well, the problem with Victor is not that he's a mad scientist. It's that he has isolated himself from other people, and that's the lesson Mary Shelley, I think, wants to emphasize. That he needs to engage with the world and not be. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, but he has become ambitious at the expense of fellow feeling and human emotions. And his story is meant to engage us, and we see the problem to be the way society has mistreated him. He was born innocent, but has been taught to be dangerous and violent. And by the end of the story, Frankenstein actually dies a natural death, but the creature comes on board the ship to pay his last respects and promises to go off, tells Walton he's going to go off and commit suicide, and vanishes into the darkness. So it's not really an open ending, but not an ending that causes you to lose sympathy with the creature that you might feel because of his mistreatment. Okay.
Thank you very much. Doug, do you want to share something?
I'll keep mine really short, but this play is very, very close to the Mary Shelley novel, so almost everything you said you're going to see in the play tonight, in terms of dynamics, in terms of what we actually see. The main difference is it's told from the standpoint of the creature. So it begins with the creation of the creature. That's the very first thing you're going to see on stage. And then it goes all the way through till the Arctic. We get the Arctic, but not until the end of the play. Our creatures are tall. They're like 6'3". They're not quite as tall as the monster. And they do have yellow eyes. Otherwise, the creature looks fairly human. The creature will learn to speak, which is very important because they have that huge scene where they talk up on Mont Blanc. It's a very philosophical scene where they get into, you know, the fact that he was abandoned is a huge, huge theme in the play. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say because you're going to see it tonight. I hope you enjoy it.
James?
So should I go next?
Yeah, I think you're up.
Okay, so it's a philosophically rich novel. There's no doubt about that. And I have no script, which I probably should because that would tighten things up in a certain way. But I decided instead of getting lost in the philosophical implications of some of the literary detail, which is easy to do, to simply cut to the chase and focus on the subtitle. So the title of the novel, as you just mentioned, is Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. And so the question is, what sorts of echoes do we hear in the conception of Prometheus? So just a kind of very quick background, and to try to get to use this as a way of getting to what I take to be one of the most philosophically interesting dimensions of the novel. Prometheus is a figure in ancient Greek mythology. The tragic playwright Aeschylus wrote a very famous play called Prometheus Bound that Mary's husband, Percy, actually wrote a kind of sequel to called Prometheus Unbound. Prometheus in the Aeschylean tragedy is a character who is, for lack of a better way of putting it, a boundary crosser of some sort, right? So in ancient Greek myth and in the ancient Greek worldview in general, there's a sense of inhabiting a world within which things occupy very clear limits or boundaries. To be a certain kind of thing is to be bounded, to have a paros in the Greek, to have certain limits that enable us to identify something as being the kind of thing that it is. And this isn't just a fact about cosmology or natural philosophy, it also carries certain ethical implications as well, so that to live a good life is to learn something about the limits within which you find yourself placed. It can be difficult to know exactly what those limits are, but the challenge is to find out what those limits are, to respect them, and to inhabit them in a way that acknowledges your place in the cosmic order. Well, according to the ancient Promethean tale, Prometheus is the guy who in effect disrespects the boundaries. The most important one here is between the Thion, the divine, and the anthropos realm, the human dimension. And so the Prometheus figure is the one who, at least as Aeschylus tells the tale, out of an excessive love of mankind, steals fire from the heavenly realm and so usurps upon the domain of Zeus, and in effect educates and cultivates us. So as Aeschylus tells the tale, one of Prometheus's most moving speeches involves his retelling all of the various gifts that he's brought to human beings, which are essentially civilizing gifts focused on our technological achievements. Right, so one of the things that fire, according to the Aeschylean myth, enables us to do is to achieve a certain kind of technical and intellectual achievement that we would otherwise not be able to achieve. So Prometheus is the boundary crosser of some sort, and secondly, instrumental in human civilization or self-cultivation. So what does this have to do with Mary Shelley's tale? Well, the first point I think I would want to make is that it's often, I see this very frequently in the secondary literature on the novel, it's easy to demonize Victor Frankenstein. And there's much to demonize. He is, as you put it, emotionally cold. He doesn't appreciate, almost in the spirit of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the power that intimate personal connections have to cultivate a life of virtue and happiness. He's overweening in his scientific ambitions. And the result of all of this is that he, in effect, alienates himself from the family and engages in a project of what we might call scientific enlightenment. Right? And so I think it's easy to demonize him, and for reasons that the third volume in this 3-volume novel gives us good reasons to think are fair, but it's also interesting that he's a heroic figure. I think he's presented in the novel in a richly ambivalent light, and so we're meant to appreciate the ambition to understand the natural world in ways that we want to care about. You know, most of us moderns are happy to make use of the scientific revolution and its technological importance in restructuring human life, but it also comes with a certain cost. And so to try to keep this as short as possible so that we can open this up to some interesting conversation. The thing that I think is most interesting is that the novel raises certain questions concerning the role that nature plays in making it possible for us to live well. And all I mean by that, to try to rephrase it slightly, is to say, is nature something that is given to us? Is nature something that lays down certain laws and constraints that impose themselves with a certain kind of forcefulness on our lives? Or is nature something that we're supposed to overcome? Is nature something that ought to somehow be amenable to human reason in such a way that we can empower ourselves to master it? Or is the proper relationship to nature possibly one that is more gentle, more receptive or passive? And we could talk about this in a lot of rich detail in relation to the novel. Just to give you one really quick example here. Most of the language that's used to describe Victor's relationship to his project is active, violent, the language of like thrusting into unknown territory, violently removing the veil that separates us from nature's mystery. And then there are lots of, for lack of a better term, epistemological language about how we acquire knowledge that is tied to the central episode in Volume 2 that tells of the creature's education and development, how he learns what the world involves and how to move around in it or how to get oriented in it. And most of that language is passive. The creature is open to what the world has to give. The creature learns. Sometimes it's necessary to move around in the world, to put the hand in the fire in order to realize that it's hot. So it's not as though he's just laying back and saying, teach me what you have to give, nature. He's moving around in the world in a certain way, but there's a much gentler and more passive way of getting oriented in the world, as if to say that at a certain fundamental level, right, nature has a great deal to teach us if we simply open ourselves to what it has to give in the immediacy of everyday human experience. And so the basic question that the novel leaves, the basic philosophical question that the novel continues to leave me with is, what role does nature play? Does nature impose certain limits upon us that we ought to respect? Or is nature simply the passive field that the human imagination and intelligence and will can simply thrust itself into? And what consequences are there in adopting one or the other of these two, if you will, epistemological attitudes towards the natural world? So light on novelistic detail, but there it is. It's a philosopher's speech. So.
All right, well, I did give myself a script because I wanted to talk about referentiality, which can lead one into digressions and further references. So I wanted to keep myself under control. And what I thought it would be interesting to point to in regard to Shelley and her rather complex relationship with romanticism, some of these philosophical questions, is her use of other works of literature in the story, particularly 2 of the 3 books that constitute the monster's education. Right, that he comes upon and he reads. Milton's Paradise Lost and Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther, or Werther to anglicize it. So Shelley makes great use of references to Paradise Lost throughout the text, but it's often difficult to figure out exactly what she's doing with it. She uses it very fluidly, sometimes ironically, sometimes in contradictory ways, often oscillating between Frankenstein and his creature in terms of their alignments with these references. Right? So there's not direct one-to-one correspondences. Sometimes she seems to be subverting and repositioning Milton, and other times she seems to be subverting romantic readings of Milton. A good example of this is in the epigraph at the beginning of the novel. It's a quote from late in Paradise Lost when a fallen Adam is asking God, "Did I ask you to make me?" Right? The quote is, "Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man?" By removing that quote from its original context, it's a very fraught moment in the text when Adam says this, Shelley delivers a pretty powerful accusation, either coming from the monster and leveled at his creator, Frankenstein, or also possibly from the man Frankenstein leveled at God. Did I ask you to make me this way such that I would do such things? Though if we read it in that way, that second way, we might also think of another moment in Paradise Lost where a despondent Satan argues that if God hadn't made him so awesome, he wouldn't have rebelled in the first place. So And if we recall that in Paradise Lost, Adam quickly follows these lines with his recognition and acceptance of the ultimate and just superiority of God, then we might also see that any one-to-one correspondences involving God and his creation don't really work here, and that Frankenstein is not himself so much godlike as rather that would-be God, a Promethean figure, who aligns much more closely here with the character of Satan in Paradise Lost. Now, the Romantics pretty famously, willfully misread Milton's Satan as the true hero of Paradise Lost in his rebelliousness against God's really jerky authority. But I think that Shelley is far more mindful of Milton's project. Satan is without a doubt the most interesting and charismatic character in Paradise Lost. He just is. He's the best. But by about halfway through, we are supposed to be seeing that he's misguided, that he is tragically full of himself, like really full of himself. As the angel Abdiel puts it in sort of famous smackdown scene right before the battle in heaven, it's about halfway through the text, Satan is to himself enthralled. And it's this self-servingness, this self-centered egotism that Milton repeatedly points to as the fundamental source of evil and the source of that disobedience to God. And it's a bad thing to disobey God in Milton, in his universe. So it's with this theme of egotism that I also find Shelley's reference to Werther so interesting. Goethe's text was wildly successful. Everybody started dressing like Werther, started killing themselves like Werther. It came out in 1774, so it's early in terms of Romanticism. It's more like a proto-romantic text. It's out of that German like Sturm und Drang period. That it sort of set the mold, you could say. And while it was the portrayal of Werther's emo, heroic, extreme sensibilities that really caught people's imaginations, what's also fascinating is that Goethe gives us his character through an epistolary novel that consists almost completely, exclusively, only of Werther's side of his correspondences. It's like a perfect bubble of individual subjectivity. So we get these glimmers of what his pen pals might be saying to him, like, you know, Werther, you really do have to get a job, or, you know, maybe she's not that into you, Werther, or, you know, you are kind of mooching off your mom a lot. But we get glimmers of it. They're like tiny invitations to a more ironic reading of the hero. But what I think is especially telling is that when Goethe pulls us back out of Werther's subjective space at the end of that novel, with the account of his suicide, it's a surprisingly ugly and non-ideal end for the young man. It's not a clean death. He doesn't die right away. It's a lingering, sort of gacking and irking kind of death. So Victor Frankenstein, to demonize him a little bit, is very Werther-like in his sensibilities and in his astounding self-centeredness. He's a genius, he's brilliant, he's appealing, he's sociopathic perhaps, right? There's a magnetism to him, and there's also that extreme sensibility that he has. But this leads me to think that what Shelley is doing with these references to Paradise Lost, to Werther, that underlying invitation to irony, is to underline ultimately the ugliness or the potential for monstrosity of romantic egotism.
So I am coming at this from yet another completely different point of view. At Metro State, I teach playwriting and screenwriting and some cinema studies, including Shakespeare on film and a horror film class. Yay, and we did Frankenstein. And recently an adaptation to stage and screen class. So very briefly, because I'm aware of our time, I'm going to just go over 3 different kinds of adaptations. The ways that texts go from one narrative mode to another narrative mode. Now the 3 kinds of narrative mode are generally the telling mode, which is anything that you read textually. So novels, poems, anything that you as a reader have to take off of the page into words and interpret in your own mind. Then we have the showing mode, and the showing mode is anything that's sort of acted out for you. So the showing mode is film, stage theater. And then there's the interactive mode, which is super cool, because the interactive mode are things that you, as a human, actually have to manipulate in order to get the story. So those would be things like video games, or very, very fully explored in Linda Hutchion's theory of adaptation, amusement park rides. And so the way that one text, and the example of Pirates of the Caribbean from amusement park ride to movie is fascinating. So the way that a text goes from mode to mode generally follows one of three forms. And the first one is called transposition. In transposition, we are moving from one of the modes, like the telling mode of a novel, to another mode, like the showing mode of a stage play. And that's what we're going to really be seeing tonight, is a transposition. What happens is you take the tools of a novel and find a way to tell the story using the tools of the stage or of the screen. The second kind of adaptation is what I like to call adaptation with a purpose. It's called commentary. And it's when we take the story and we retell the story, maybe moving from a mode to a different mode, or maybe staying within the same mode. But in doing so, we're foregrounding certain elements so that the author's purpose is served. So, for example, let's tell the life of Alexander Hamilton. Okay, cool. So, but we're going to foreground things like class struggle, class conflict. We're going to foreground things like the need for the role of education in the bettering of a human being. If we've all seen examples of this with, like, there's the Great Expectations. It's called The Green Dress, Great Expectations, with Ethan Hawke. And it's like, okay, let's take Great Expectations, completely divorce it from the time and space it was originally in, and let's use it to talk about things like, again, class struggle and the role of art in our world. And Whale's Frankenstein, the movie version of Frankenstein, the bolt in the neck Frankenstein, that's a terrible way to put it, sorry.
Everyone does it.
The bolt in the neck Frankenstein is really, if we look at it, our commentary on the original text. And what it's doing is it's taking the original text of Frankenstein and going, okay, let's use this text to look at the roles of masculinity and femininity, the fear of the new technologies between the two wars. Let's look at it to examine class struggle. That the movie version of Frankenstein has the best organized mob, by the way. It's like, let's all move in an orderly pattern with our pitchforks and torches. Our third kind of adaptation is an analog. Okay, the first two kinds, transposition and commentary, are very clearly and usually quite announced versions of the text. Like, we're seeing a play called Frankenstein, there's a movie called Frankenstein. Even if we're doing the Baz Luhrmann version of Romeo and Juliet, it's still called Romeo and Juliet. So the relationship to the original is announced. The third kind, the analog, is usually a parallel that can stand alone pretty darn well on its own. There's no doubt that it's a take on the original text, but the take is far enough divorced from the original that knowing the original is only just kind of a nice thing and will make you feel clever when you're watching the text. So, like, if you know Ulysses and you're watching O Brother, Where Art Thou, you're going to feel super clever. If you know Romeo and Juliet and you're watching West Side Story, you're going to feel super clever. Similarly, Young Frankenstein can be seen as an analog to the original Frankenstein movie. It stands great on its own, but if you know the original the Whale Frankenstein movie, and better still the novel, you're going to be like, I'm getting all the jokes and I'm super duper clever. I usually like to argue that there's a fourth kind of adaptation, and that is the adaptation of a sort of cultural idea, and I think that's something that Frankenstein has become. The idea of technology is going to strive against the creator of that technology. The idea of creation versus creator. We can look at how many movies there have been where the thing that has been created has risen up to destroy, or at least super duper try to destroy the thing that created it. And we can go right into, you know, I mean, you can probably name a few.
Terminator.
Terminator, good.
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
Ex Machina.
Ex Machina, The Matrix. We can go to, I teach aliens, you know, it's like 2001. You can look at all of these different versions of the thing that scares us is the thing that we made. And to sort of reinforce that idea, we can go to Stephen King's book, Dance Macabre, which talks about the three main kinds of things that scare us. It's a fantastic book, if a little unwieldy at times. And he talks about our three main kinds of monsters. The first is the vampire, and he sort of folds vampire into zombies. The vampire is the thing that wants to consume us. It is outside of us and wants to hurt us. It is the threat from beyond that wants to invade. And it's that fear of invasion and the violation of the body that comes with the vampire monster. The second kind is the thing without a name, and that's our Frankenstein's monster. The thing without a name is that thing that we created that has grown outside and beyond our control. And his third kind is it's the werewolf, the Jekyll and Hyde. The evil is within the body, and what I am capable of is the thing of which I am frightened. He does a fourth kind with ghosts and spirits, but usually aligns those with castles and places. Those are usually latched onto a place. So the whole sort of cultural consciousness of that which we create is going to destroy us is something that we see adapted over and over and over again as well. So those are your three main kinds of adaptation in adaptation theory, cribbed mercilessly from Julie Sanders' excellent book, Adaptation and Appropriation, which is a great read and which I recommend.
Well, thank you all. I would say we have about, just to give us a comfortable span of time to walk over, use the restroom, etc. now, especially knowing that...
A lot of people have to get tickets from Will Call.
Oh, and if you have to get Will tickets, yeah, if you gotta go to Will Call to get tickets, then I suppose now is the time to go.
Thanks.
But otherwise, I think we have about 5 minutes to burn if people have questions.
I forgot to say one important thing. The two actors that play the leads are alternating the roles every other night. I think in an attempt to kind of show similarities and differences between these two figures. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So think about that as you're watching it. Like if you came back tomorrow night, you'd see it.
Well, you know, an obvious question that's actually embedded in that bit of information is you know, how do your various perspectives perhaps how might they be informed by, or what light might they shed on that choice, that directorial choice?
And speaking of that directorial choice, one of the actors is a person of color.
Yes.
And so that reading or that cast, is that coming into audience reaction to it?
I've only done one talk back. We talked a lot about switching the roles. We didn't talk about race, but I'm sure people are thinking about it.
It's always got to be there.
It's got to be. It's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
James, Gwendolyn, do either of you have something to say about that interplay?
On that topic, no, not really. It's a good question.
Yeah,
I mean,
is
dismissive,
casting the
yeah.
African American as the monster disturbing? Does it generate an entirely different take on the play, perhaps? Or does a person's feelings of racial difference kick in and really change the play?
I think that's such a subjective question. I can't remember which cast you're seeing. Do you know it's the blue or the green cast?
We don't know.
Yeah, we're not
No.
sure.
Sullivan's the creature.
Who? Sullivan's the
Sullivan's the
creature?
creature.
So it's the black actor who's the creature.
I mean, it isn't, from the point of view of the nature theme that's important to me, it's interesting. I mean, in the sense that the creature that Victor creates isn't supposed to have anything like a natural identity. I'm not saying that race is. What I'm saying is that there's a certain interpretation of race that I think was fairly common in 1818 when the first edition of the novel appeared, according to which it's closer to something like a natural way of being in the world than it is as we would put it today, in some instances at least, a social construct or a boundary that's rather fluid. So it's certainly relevant to my topic. I mean, it's interesting that Victor assembles his pieces and parts that he uses to create. It's a very non-naturalistic conception of what it is to bring an organism into being. It's far more, it's modeled on techne rather than bios, if that makes sense from the Greek. It's modeled more on technical production than it is modeled on anything like the organic appearance of something on the basis of certain organic processes. And so it's a choice for us that would be unavoidable, since we can't assemble an actor out of pieces and parts that recreate the technical nature of the creature's origins.
They
But,
tried that in one production, but the
and
production
failed.
company got
It was a
sued, so.
disaster.
PETA got
Yeah. So it's not irrelevant, but I think the Shelley version of this would probably want to minimize any suggestion that this is somehow a creature that can be mapped onto something like an organic process or an organic mode of being.
Hands, whoever wants to go first. I think we have time for both of them, so.
Cool. Go ahead. Thank you. With that in mind, what do you think is the significance of Shelley's original portrayal of Frankenstein as being mostly human, but with slight differences in the eye color and the skin, perhaps invoking the uncanny valley concept, where something is almost human but just not quite? And like, how does that factor into what his nature is? You know, like, he already has some kind of physical uncanniness. Could he possibly have avoided by any means the nature of otherness that comes from that?
Well, I don't know.
The uncanny version.
Yeah. I don't know if this quite answers your question, but also building on this other question about the racial difference and what that might bring to it. When I think about the scene where, of the creation and then the immediate rejection, and there's something very much about this, abjecting of something that has come from the self. It is his creation. He has made it out of his own genius. In his own, as I stressed, self-centeredness too, right? And then as soon as it stirs, as soon as it comes to life, he disavows it completely. And I like your idea about that element of uncanniness too, because the uncanny is that thing that we have always known that we're not supposed to have known, or that we don't want to have known, that reminds us of itself. It's very closely linked with ideas of abjection, and I see that very much. I read that section, I'm like, oh, there he is. He's like abjecting the parts of himself that he wants to reject because it is quite horrible. And that would be interesting to think about too then in terms of racial commentary of the actors.
It would be, the creature would be less odd or uncanny or monstrous if he had just revived a recently dead corpse. It would have made more sense, and for her to apparently deliberately make him assemble parts from different corpses makes it more a construct and more disturbing, I guess, to contemplate, and more artificial. I don't know if it makes it scarier, but
Well, and certainly at that time it was considered taboo, right, to dissect corpses at all. Is that right? Or is my history
It was
wrong?
still totally illegal, yeah.
grave robbing was definitely illegal. But I don't know when the dissection became.
No, I'm not sure about
I
that.
think there were
I think it was
dissections that
earlier.
Yeah,
occurred
they talk about
a
it.
century
The sections
before.
were legal, but
But
But grave robbing and
violate
Yeah.
a corpse in this manner by,
Definitely.
certainly.
There's something weirdly putty-like too about, I was just at a conference and went to a panel on Mary Shelley in preparation for this. And one of the papers is about the strange bloodlessness of the text. The bloodiness doesn't happen. Even when he's shot, he doesn't make reference to bleeding. And with the creation, so, I've noticed that too. He's got all these body parts, and we sort of, I think we fill in the blood because we're thinking about it, but in fact, it's all just, it denaturalizes even more what's going on with the materials in blood.
Why don't we take, I think we just have time for one more question, so go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up why I think that the use of the actors of different races is so important and an awesome choice in my opinion. Even if it wasn't intentional to use the different races to like, you know, do a political meaning or anything, I think that, especially with what's going on in our world right now, no matter where we are, that this thing is so prevalent, that using a black actor is an amazing choice. Also, I think when I saw Frankenstein, I saw the play before with the role switched of what we'll see tonight. So, first of all, I love the play. It was wonderful. And one thing that, well, I think that, in my mind, the main theme of Frankenstein, the play that I saw was just the idea of being a misfit in this world, no matter who you are, you know. And, you know, so there were certain parts in the play that really stood out to me, such as when the monster and the doctor are talking with each other, and the monster brings up how he never asked to be created. He never asked for it, and how the doctor replies with something like why don't you just kind of overcome it? Why don't you just do this? But you know, the monster has to explain that he can't because of the circumstances against him, what he was born into, that he can't. And when I like seeing that and knowing that the actors were going to be switched, I immediately thought right then, I was like, this would be so beautiful. This is so beautiful now, but when the actors are switched, it's such a powerful message because this is what happens today. So I think that just like as a compliment to the show, that I think whether it was intentional or not, it's a beautiful choice, especially being in a totally diverse city where things like, you know, racism is still going on every single day. So, yeah.
Well,
I want to throw out a comment, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Short comment.
Sure, I guess you're going to have almost the last word.
During this time of Percy Shelley, there was a very important poet, lesser known of with the Romantic movement in Italy, called Giacomo Leopardi, and he himself was a Frankenstein. He was totally isolated by his society and created by his father to fit the ambitions that his father couldn't achieve in his lifetime. And he died at a very young age, very miserable. He actually frequented brothel houses because he was never able to have any sort of human connection with anyone.
An Italian adaptation, I guess. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. I guess since we have 30 seconds, the pitch is basically check us out on Facebook. It's the best way to keep in touch with our organization and to see what else is going on. So the Denver Project for Humanistic Inquiry on Facebook. Like us, follow us, come to other events. And one last round of applause for the panelists. Thank you guys so much. By the way, just so you also know, the Talkback with the Cast, unfortunately, is not happening tonight due to some union technicalities that prevented them from doing it. So I apologize. The scheduling just it turned out it wasn't possible in the end. So, but enjoy the show.
Thank you. Thank you.